I should really introduce myself, which is at the top of this slide, which is I'm Rachel Hosker. I'm Deputy Head of Special Collections and Archives Manager at the University of Edinburgh. And I've been involved from that collections perspective and from a real sort of burning interest in automatic handwriting recognition and automatic text recognition and how we can use this to better effect. And I'll talk more about that later. Please do make use of the Slack channels that's open. We're going to have the breaks where there'll be questions asked, where you can talk to each other. And we want this to be an inclusive session. Please do, we have some community rules, so please do, if we can have the next slide, thank you. So that it is an inclusive space and we're all kind to each other. We want people, if someone's asked a question and you have some answer for it, then join in, help each other out. Do keep your cameras and microphones switched off except for breaks, just so we make sure everybody has a stable experience as much as possible. As I said before, it is a place for all, so we want to be very open about and ask any questions you have. In my family, we always say there's no such thing as a daft question, because if you ask it, someone else will be asking it too. And if you have any specific questions after the session, do find us in either Slack or in the chats, or if you reflect afterwards, then get in touch with us later on. Okay, next slide, please. I would like to kick off the welcome to you all for this session, and we're going to hear from Daryl Green, who is Head of Special Collections at the University of Edinburgh, followed by Riza Gobelboff, who is Dean and Arnold H. Liam Professor of Law and Professor of History at the University of Virginia School of Law, followed by Melissa Terrace, who is Professor of Digital Cultural Heritage at the University of Edinburgh as well. I would like now to pass over to Daryl to kick off the welcomes for us. Thank you, Daryl.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And please allow me to add my warm welcome to all of our attendees to today's opening event. In this odd world where time zones have little meaning anymore, I'd like to say a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good evening to all. And what a fantastic group that we have here today. We have professionals from academic institutions such as Texas A&M, the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile, universities of Glasgow and Oxford and Cambridge, from local and government institutions like the National Archives of Malaysia, Library of Congress, local councils, Senate of Ireland, and from libraries and archives like the American Philosophical Society Library, state archives in Zadar, Croatia, and the British Library. Only in an online platform such as this could we bring together such a diverse expertise, and we welcome you all. I've had the pleasure of observing and working with the editor group since it kicked off in its remote working package this week last year. And one of the many silver linings to this pandemic, the force to move to working remotely, has actually spurred on this project to where it's at today. And that's largely down to the effort of those involved and the spirit of collaboration that has been found between the University of Virginia and the University of Edinburgh teams. These two projects, which you're about to hear about, are a shining example of international institutional collaboration in the face of adversity. However, this event doesn't mark the end of that collaboration, but instead an opening up to all of the attendees here today and throughout the ensuing workshop. This week, you'll learn more about these tools and their implementations, and hopefully contribute to our understanding and development of future work packages. Our collaboration only gets wider from here. We at Edinburgh and Virginia have found common ground in the need and the desire to pool expertise around unlocking data from valuable collections. Only in the past few years have we seen the growth of academic interest in the data possibilities to be found in cultural heritage collections. And data sets issued by a number of institutions has created this new ecosystem of collections as data. However, the resources in our care and accessible to researchers are often dense and complex. And the two tools on display this week are exploring that idea beyond traditional metadata creation, using machine learning to realize the intellectual capital locked up in these historic resources. I am very excited for today and the ensuing workshops, and to see where the next steps in our collaboration will take us. Before I hand over to Dean Golyubov, I wanted to add my brief note of thanks to the core editor team. Elise, Norman, Lauren, Randy, Mike, Ianthe, Rachel, Jen, these are names you're going to get to know throughout this week. What you'll see today is a result of their close work together, with their institutions backing their collaboration. I hope that you all enjoy today, and I look forward to our conversations later this week. Now I'd like to hand over to Risa Golyubov, Dean of the University of Virginia Law School, and Arnold H. Leon, Professor of Law and Professor of History, to add her welcome. Dean Golyubov.
Thank you so much, Daryl. It is wonderful to be here. You stole my line. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am so delighted to be here with everyone for the start of what is going to be a really interesting and wonderful workshop. So as Daryl said, I'm Risa Golyubov. I'm the Dean of the University of Virginia School of Law. I have some thanks to add to the others. I want to thank the Center for Research Collections at the University of Edinburgh for hosting the conference, the entire editor team who put the conference together, and the Scottish Library and Information Council, whose grant funding has made this workshop possible. And I want to say, just as a personal matter, I wish that I could spend the whole workshop with you all, because in addition to being the dean, and sadly I can't, but in addition to my role as being the law school dean here, I'm also a legal historian, and I have been told by some of our librarians that I'm considered a heavy library user, at least when I'm able to engage in my scholarship, which hasn't been for a little while. But so I'm a dean, heavy library user, and a historian. And in all of those roles, I am, I think, triply proud that the University of Virginia Law Library has been the testing ground for the editor tool that you're going to learn about over the next few days. And our librarians have been using the tool on our collection of Scottish Court of Session papers that date from the 18th and the 19th century. And what the tool has meant is that instead of simply cataloging the names and dates of court cases found in this large collection, editor has allowed our team to fully digitize the materials, providing tens of thousands of pages of searchable text and describing the documents, as Daryl said, with rich metadata. And so the fundamental thing for me about this is that the digitization has really revealed many of the voices that are hidden within these Scottish Court of Session archives. And researchers can now learn about the lives of farmers, sailors, enslaved and indentured laborers, printers, husbands and wives, tradesmen and tradeswomen, many of whom rarely appear elsewhere in the historic record. And as a legal historian, I just see how this editor tool really represents a remarkable leap forward in our ability to see into the past. And for my own history, I write about constitutional history, which is an area where people often think we're only talking about Supreme Courts and justices and larger than life people who are taking dramatic actions at a particular moment in time. But my own history is really about how constitutional change and legal change are made by everyday people all the time, in conversation with and through often legal channels of formal legal change, but often outside of them. And that in order to understand what goes on in the law, we have to understand what goes on outside of it too. And among those who lived ordinary lives. And editor really allows historians like me, and I'm sure many others, to hear voices that haven't been heard before and to better understand the full sweep of our history. So just sitting here listening to you all, thinking about what you're about to learn, it's just a thrilling development and a real testament to the value of scholars, librarians, archivists, and technologists who are working all together across an ocean, maybe several oceans, to solve common problems. So you'll hear a lot more from my colleagues in the UVA Law Library and from the team at the University of Edinburgh in the sessions to come. And I will stop now so that you can start hearing from them. But thank you for letting me have a glimpse into this event. I'm excited it's going to be recorded. I will dip into it later. I hope you enjoy, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much. Melissa Terrace, would you like to join us now?
Thanks, Rachel. Welcome to Edinburgh. I'm sitting in a cupboard in my house just now where I work and have been working for the past year. I'm sure you're all similarly working from home just now, but it's wonderful that technology is bringing us together in this way. It's also wonderful that we have the opportunity to discuss the potential for HDR and OCR and how that's going to really transform historical research at scale. We're just really at the tipping point of that happening. Who am I? I'm a professor here at the University of Edinburgh. I direct a lot of large-scale initiatives about technology here and try and increase people's use of technology in their research across the arts, humanities and social sciences. But I'm also one of the members of the Reed Co-op who deliver Transcribus. I've been part of the Transcribus tool for the past decade as it has evolved. I'm one of the three board members of Transcribus. I'm the scholarly director, but I will say there's a large team behind the tool. And if you don't know what Transcribus is, you'll be hearing more about it over the next couple of days. It is one of the main ways that you can get your handwritten text turned into machine processable code at the moment. It's really rare that a research project jumps from can we build a tool that can do that to, oh look, we have an infrastructure which is now serving the rest of the world. It has taken a decade and over 50 members of staff in 10 different universities funded by the European Union to get to that stage. I thought it would be nice just to run through some of the stats about Transcribus and how big it has grown over the past couple of years. So last month we reached 50,000 registered users around the world. We have about 2,000 active users a week. And last year, we had 18,000 unique users who processed 660,000 jobs. 20 million images went through Transcribus and we generated 490 million words of transcribed text. So if we see that at scale, we can see how this is starting to transform access to archival material and then what we can do with it afterwards. I'm really pleased to see that the University of Edinburgh is a founding member of the Reed Co-op. We'll put in the chat, we'll put some more information about the Reed Co-op if you're interested in hearing more, but you will hear more about it. And we're delighted that this workshop and the project and the wider community and the editor project are making such good use of Transcribus. We're really looking forward to seeing the results, hearing what you're going to do in the workshop. And thank you so much to the editor team, the folks at the CSRC and the University of Virginia colleagues as well for exploring this really live aspect of how we can use technology to benefit research in archives and history. Thanks very much. Back over to you, Rachel.
Thanks very much, Melissa, for those kind words, and it is exciting. You're absolutely right. Thank you too to Daryl and Risa for their welcome. It's fantastic to have that sort of consolidated by you all and to show the support our institutions have provided for this project. I'd now like to introduce Norman Roger, who is our projects manager at the Centre for Research Collections and has been pivotal in getting the funding from the Scottish Library Information Council and in directing us and pushing this project forward. He's going to go over the programme and what we're trying to do today and remind everyone what we aim to achieve by the end of today. So over to you, Norman.
Thanks, Rachel. Hello, everybody, wherever you are, whatever time it is. We started planning this event over a year ago, and the original intention was to have a live workshop in Edinburgh last summer. For obvious reasons, that didn't happen, and we pushed back to the autumn, hoping we could do it then. Once again, we couldn't, so we went back to our funders and asked to do it as an online event. So the event will be different to the one we originally envisaged, but I hope you'll find it interesting, valuable, and most importantly, enjoyable. As Daryl touched on, one advantage of being online is obviously that we're able to open up to a much wider audience, and we've been really quite overwhelmed with the level of interest and response. So thank you all for taking part today, especially those of you who are joining us at a ridiculously early hour on Pacific Standard Time. Much appreciating the effort. Can I have my first slide, please, Elise? Okay, so you'll all have seen the program for today, so you should get a rough idea of what we're trying to achieve. What we aim to do is to give you an overview of the collections that we've been working with, outline some of the challenges that they present, and look at the tools and the techniques that we've used to address these. And then finally, we also want to try and find ways of applying these techniques to other collections in other institutions so that other people can get the benefit of our work. As with most of the other online events that we've all been attending over the last year or so, there is always an element of risk as we're all working from home and are therefore reliant on domestic internet connections, avoiding parcel deliveries, screaming children, barking dogs, etc. So please bear with us if there's any hiccups along the way. Next slide, please. So the two collections that we've focused on are the papers of the Scottish Court of Session, which I'll introduce in detail in a moment, and the notebooks and papers of the geologist Sir Charles Lyell, which my colleagues will present to you in around 20 minutes. So next slide. And joining me for this first session are two of our US colleagues, Randy Flaherty, who's Special Collections Librarian at the University of Virginia Law Library, and Jim Ambuski, who's Director of Center for Digital History at Mount Vernon. Next slide, please. Oh, you got there. No, sorry, back one, it's too quick. Okay, move to the next one. I think there's a slide missing, but yeah, okay. Just to give you a little bit of background about the session papers, as some of you will know, the Scottish Court of Session papers are documents used in the presentation of cases in the Court of Session, which is Scotland's Supreme Court. Within the collections of 3 libraries in Edinburgh, the Faculty of Advocates, the Signet Library and the University of Edinburgh, as well as a collection held by the University of Virginia, there are approximately 250,000 items, including the written pleadings of contested cases, answers, replies, case summaries, many of which have contemporary annotations. These date from the 1500s in handwritten form and from 1710 onwards to the present day in printed text. They represent what is almost certainly the world's largest single body of uncatalogued English language printed material before 1900. And as such, they provide a valuable insight into the social, economic, political, and legal history of Scotland during the period of the Scottish Enlightenment. But, and there's a very big but, many of these volumes are in very poor physical condition and they require a lot of conservation work before they can even be opened, far less digitized. They are also largely uncatalogued, particularly the university collection, and I think those in the Advocates Library. The 3 Edinburgh libraries first looked at tackling the issue of the session papers as far back as 1999, with a funding bid to microfilm and catalogue the collections. But the bid was unsuccessful and the idea was not revisited until a pilot project in 2016, which undertook a survey to explore conservation and preservation needs and start to experiment with techniques in digitization with a view to automated cataloguing. Next slide, please. So, as you can see from the slide, across the 3 Edinburgh libraries, there are around 5,500 bound volumes, sometimes with over 100 documents relating to multiple cases contained inside a single volume. As I say, these are in very poor condition, so a key area for consideration before digitization was conservation. We had to deal with large, fragile bindings, as you can sort of see on the slide there. Some of them were tied together with ribbons, large foldouts. There was big maps. There was double pages folded in and out the way. There was a lot of dust. There was a lot of wear and tear. The papers were not originally bound, and they were gathered and bound by individual collectors, probably never actually intending to reopen them. And so some of them literally fall apart on handling. And our conservator estimated that many volumes would only survive being opened 3 times before they broke. So we had to accept that some damage would occur during digitization. So we had to try and clearly minimize this, and where possible to make sure that all the material was conserved ready for digitization so that it would withstand the process. The biggest challenge is the fact that, as I say, there was very little cataloging done in advance, and the only way people could find things in these huge volumes was if they knew roughly what date a case took place, and then had to go through it carefully manually. And so manual cataloging and indexing would have taken many, many years of work. Next slide, please. So some of the volumes were, like this one, were just impossible to even open. This one had to be taken apart and then rebound as 3 separate volumes before we could start to work on it. The Advocates Library has around 30 volumes in this condition, and at a cost of about £1,000 each to rebind them. You can get some idea of the cost that this the conservation work alone will take to do this whole collection. So next slide, please. So in terms of digitization, the work was carried out by the university's digital imaging unit, and most of the work was carried out on a V-shaped scanner like the one in the picture here. What we also had to do was, where there were foldouts, they had to be photographed separately, and then the images reinserted into the sequence of the digitized content. So we had to develop a color code system so that digitization staff could mark the start and end of each document within a volume. So a green marker card would be used alongside the start page of a document, a red one at the end, and a yellow one to denote that a fold-out photograph had to be reinserted. This in turn had to be noted on a numbered image database, so it was quite a complicated process given the scale of the material we were working with. Next slide. So, having digitized the content, what we were trying to do was to arrive at a solution where we go from this, which is a nice photograph, but still largely unusable. To the next slide, please. To this, which is OCR'd machine-readable text that can be free text searched. And my colleague Mike Bennett will outline this in much more detail shortly. So before I hand over to Randy and Jim, I should just say that so far we've only scratched the surface in terms of digitization. We did a sample of around 150 volumes. Because of the complexity of the material, the high costs involved both for conservation and digitization, it's a very slow process. And we estimate it will take a designated team around 2 to 3 years to complete the work, and probably cost in the region of 2 to 3 million. So please get your checkbooks out at the end of the session. At this point, I will hand over to Randy Flaherty at the University of Virginia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Norman. So I'm really excited to be here. And thank you all for coming. Thank you for the Scottish Library and Information Council for making this possible. I'm Randy Flaherty. I'm the Special Collections Librarian at the UVA Law Library. And I'm here with my colleague Jim. We'll be talking about our collection and sort of what brought us into this, this collaboration. And we've put our URL for our project here on the screen if you'd like to see what we've been up to. And I'll also mention this is a real team effort. And Jim and I are speaking this morning, but Lauren Molds, who is head of digital scholarship at the UVA Law Library, he's really the tech lead, and you'll be hearing a lot more from him later. So next slide, please. So what is the collection that brings us into this collaboration? As our dean mentioned, we have a collection at the Law Library, Scottish Court of Session papers, about 60 boxes of printed case materials that were presented before the Court of Session from 1757 to 1834. So this is a much smaller collection than those collections that exist over in Scottish libraries, the ones that Norman was just talking about. But a lot of the theme of our talk and sort of our collaboration here is that even with this really small collection, processing it, cataloging it, extracting this rich metadata was really slow and really time consuming and necessitated really finding another tool that could, the editor tool that could make this process more efficient. So why is a library in Virginia interested in a collection of Scottish papers? We wondered that too. Our collection was purchased by our library director in the 1980s. It was originally part of a private collection and came up for sale in the 80s, and he purchased it, and it was basically sitting in our library basement for a number of years. No one was really doing anything with it. You know, we knew sort of the title of the collection. We knew that it would, you know, the processing would be a pretty arduous task. So it was sort of fell to the bottom of the priority list because it was Scottish papers and not, you know, about US history. So it was really when we started opening the box tops and just sort of checking it out, seeing what's in there, that we started to get really excited, because what we started to find was that these cases that came before the court, which could be about commerce, could be about contracts, could be about migration, could be about all sorts of things, could be also Atlantic in scope and could touch on really interesting parts of North American history, about you know, US colonial history. And in addition, you know, in these documents, we started seeing stories about people who weren't always part of the historical record. So stories about women, stories about enslaved people. And so we were immediately fascinated, and we started nerding out about it. And, you know, again, this really took sort of opening up the box, flipping through, getting past the first page of these documents and reading a bit more. So the question was, well, how do we make that information accessible? Could I have the next slide, please, Elise? So just to give you a little sense of sort of what we were dealing with in our collection, this is a picture of, a very dramatic picture of what some of our documents look like. Norman was talking about documents that were all bound together. Ours came disbound. So usually a case document or a group of case documents, part of the same case, would be disbound in sort of these little clumps. And could I have the next slide, please? And here on the left is just what a typical first page would look like. You can see it's printed. You can see it has some marginalia. You can also see that there's a huge wealth of information just on this one page. That's great for cataloging. But the documents could range, you know, up to 30 pages, and even beyond the first page, you know, that's when you start getting into the narrative of the case. You start getting into citations, all those things. Additionally, as Norman was mentioning, there could be documents attached to the cases. So this is a map on the right of a brewery. That was totally fascinating to us. Next slide, please. And then the real goldmine was in the appendices. And we would often find that included in these case documents were things like, in the appendix, could be things like a deposition, which is totally fascinating, or copies of logbooks, census materials, letters, family letters, business letters, and these are just some examples here that we found. And in many cases, you know, there's a good chance these are really the only extant copies that exist. So we really want to find a way to make this stuff accessible in a process that was not prohibitive in terms of cost and staff time. Next slide. So again, we're thinking about sort of the everyday people, the everyday stories, the historical narratives that are included in these papers. We started thinking about digitization. We started thinking about metadata extraction. And I'm going to pass it now to Jim to sort of talk about how that process played out.
Well, thank you very much, Randy, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm very delighted to be here with you today. My name is Jim Ambuske. I'm of the Center for Digital History at the Washington Library at Mount Vernon. That's George Washington's Mount Vernon, the guy who caused a kind of a dust up between us and the UK a few centuries ago. I also host the podcast Conversations at the Washington Library there, which actually features an interview with our own Rachel Hosker. And so you can check that out at georgewashingtonpodcast.com. Now, I'm here because I was the postdoctoral fellow in digital humanities at the UVA Law Library. The project I came to work on was our Scottish Court of Session project, in part because I'm a historian of the American Revolution and my research focuses on Scotland and America in the Revolutionary period. And so this has been a terrific research journey for me, one that continues despite my employment now on the banks of the Potomac, even though I'm coming to you from just down the street of Thomas Jefferson's Monticello today. So just to give you a geographic sense of the crazy world we live in right now. As Randy suggested, one of the guiding principles of the UVA Session Papers project has been to increase access and discoverability to seemingly obscure 18th and 19th century legal records that actually have a remarkably great deal to tell us about society, politics, economy, and law in the Atlantic world in this period. Part of that process and part of our strategy has involved building a digital framework that has enabled multiple ways into these records, from the kind of catalog you might expect from a digital collection or a library collection, to interpretive layers that leverage recent scholarship, all in an effort to drive new research and teaching opportunities using these materials. To accomplish these goals required certain decisions about how we would organize the collection in digital space, how we would describe session papers as historical artifacts, and just how intensive a metadata scheme we wanted to pursue. And now we got lucky in a sense. As Randy noted, that sometime in the past, our session papers were disbound and the documents associated with the same case were more or less lumped together. We were also very lucky because our session papers have extensive marginalia in which a lawyer, a clerk, a judge, or the original owner of these documents from the period wrote the name of a case on a document, often writing what the judges said in court as they were saying it, and gave us a case name, and which was really critical. Now, this wasn't always the case, but often it was, and this allowed us to identify a case name for cases that were not reported. And just very briefly, simply put, when a case wasn't deemed legally significant enough by the legal community, it wasn't reported or it wasn't included in a volume of published case reports. So, and this is really important as it relates to Scotland and the session papers, and we can talk more about why that is later if there's interest, but yeah, it's a long story. So the case itself became the project's organizing principle. We began building case shells, as we call them, to which we could attach each case document, provide a brief summary of litigation, and identify the individuals named within the documents and their roles in the case. And the majority of this work, as Randy has already suggested, was and still is done by hand until just recently. May I have the next slide, please, Elise? So here you can see an example of a case record, Gelly and Campbell versus Campbell in 1778. Now, in some instances, we were able to create case shells for reported cases using structured data that we scraped with permission from the British and Irish Legal Information Institute, or Bailey.org, which is a massive repository for historical legal data. It's quite amazing. But the majority of the cases heard by the Court of Session, like this case you see here, like Gelly and Campbell v. Campbell, never appeared in a published report. So we had to build the record completely from the ground up. To produce the kind of finished record that a patron sees here on my left, you need to populate the fields you see on my right, which is a screenshot of the backend. And that's just only a snippet of the backend that is of the fields required to populate this particular case. So at this moment, this really requires two things: a degree of expertise, either in Scotland or the Atlantic world in the 18th century, although that's not always necessary, but much more importantly, a considerable amount of time and patience to read through each associated case document, identify the principal litigants, the judges involved, the legal counsel for each party, and develop a short abstract to describe the controversy at the heart of the case. So that means that the supermajority of the case and document metadata you'll find throughout SCOS, which is our shorthand name for our project, the majority of that metadata that you'll find in the project at the moment was entered by me, Randy, Lauren Molds, ongoing collaborators at the Law Library, and our student interns, all sitting down at our desks, simply taking the time to read through these case documents, which can take hours, depending on the size of the document collection. Again, we're going these extra miles because our goals are to offer patrons access to these records and to understand the history of the Atlantic world through these materials. May I have the next slide, please? We want to understand people like James Graham, who was an enslaved man who may make his only appearance in the historical record in these documents. Next slide, please. We want to understand where the people mentioned in session papers lived and labored, and what that can tell us about life in an era of revolution and social change in Scotland and Europe and in North America. But as you might already suspect, our ability to tell these kinds of stories is limited by the financial and human investment we're able to make in this kind of rich description. Even for a small collection like ours, we'll all be dead by the time that the last case is fully described to our satisfaction if we continue on sort of hand curation. So we made the decision to scale back on that descriptive work in the interest of getting more documents digitized and available. And that brings us to the final point that Randy, Norman, and I kind of want to make in this opening session. If I may have the next slide, please. When we began collaborating with our friends at the University of Edinburgh in late 2017 and in earnest in 2018, we very quickly realized we faced a common set of challenges despite the vast difference in the scale of our collections. We wanted to find ways to digitize large corpus of material. We wanted to create basic catalog records. We wanted to develop robust metadata, increase access and discoverability of these materials, and create the kind of interpretive frameworks or entry points you see here from the UVA project that would encourage people to make new discoveries in these documents. And if we could find a way to make part of that basic description side of the process more efficient using technology, reducing the hours we spend hunting and keying in names, places, and document titles, we could devote more energy as historians, librarians, archivists, digital humanists, student interns, and volunteers to giving those data points greater historical meaning and public utility. So these are just a few of the reasons we're here today. That's part of the reason why Editor exists. And we look forward to sharing more with you about this work over the course of the workshop and hearing about the challenges that you all face in working with your collections. So thank you very much. And I'll hand the floor back to Norman.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, so there'll be opportunity for some questions after the end of the next session, which is going to be led by Elaine McGilvray and Elise Ramsey. They'll be talking about the Charles Lyell collections. So I shall hand you over to them. Thank you.
Thanks, Norman. So thank you and a warm welcome to you all. My name is Elaine McGillivray and I'm the Senior Lyell Archivist at the Centre for Research Collections at the University of Edinburgh. And together with our Lyell Project Archivist, Elise Ramsey, we are responsible for the Lyell Archive collections here at the University of Edinburgh. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you the Lyell collections, our work, and to share with you some of our plans and aspirations for the future. The images that you're about to see are a mix of high-resolution photographs and some low-resolution pictures. The high-resolution images were created by our colleagues at the Centre for Research Collections Digital Imaging Unit during a child digitisation project. And then there are quick pictures which are taken on phone or iPad as I and colleagues have been working through the collection. Could I have the next slide, please, Elise? So Sir Charles Lyell, 1797 to 1875, was arguably the greatest public figure in science of the mid-19th century, whose geological breakthroughs paved the way for Charles Darwin's theories, and best known for his best-selling book Principles of Geology, 1830 to 1833, Lyell made acceptable the theory that the Earth was millions of years old and that it's shaped by geological processes still active in the modern era. And he made it possible for people to think about the Earth as a dynamic and developing planet in the way that we do today. The next slide, please, Elise. The Lyell collections as a whole are the sum of multiple accruals which have coalesced at Edinburgh over a span of almost 100 years. As early as 1927, the university was gifted a collection of letters and notes by Lady Lyell of Kinnordy, which included Lyell's notes on Madeira, from 1853 to 54, and his notes on Forfarshire, Scotland, from earlier in his life. Next slide, please, Louise. Given at the same time were select works from Lyell's library at Kinnordy House, which feature Lyell's indexes and marginal annotations, especially on a series of off-prints from the Royal and Geological Societies. Next slide, please. Until recently, 2 large components of the Lyell archive remained in private hands. However, in 2019, thanks to a highly successful fundraising campaign, and aided by the support of key partner institutions such as the Natural History Museum, the National Library of Scotland, the National Museums of Scotland, the Universities of Oxford and Cambridge, groups and donations pledged from over 1,000 individuals, we were able to purchase Lyell's 294 notebooks and bring them here to the Centre for Research Collections at the University of Edinburgh. Next slide, please. And then in 2020, we were able to acquire the remaining correspondence and papers from the Lyell family via the UK government's acceptance in lieu of inheritance tax scheme. And the archives include material documenting the entire life of Lyell, from age 7 when he writes to his mother and father, to condolences written to his family after his death in 1875. Next slide, please. This extensive body of archive material is complemented by a collection of around 150 geological specimens held at the University of Edinburgh's Coburn Geological Museum, and by an ever-expanding collection of editions of Lyell's published works. Each element of the collection stands on its own merit as an important resource for research and understanding the work of Sir Charles Lyell. Next slide, please, Elise. But together, the collections offer a much more comprehensive and holistic view into the way in which he thought, worked, expressed and refined his ideas. And they also afford us an opportunity to identify and understand the role of the partnerships and networks that he formed and examine how they aided and influenced his work. And as a whole, the collections have huge modern relevance, given topical concerns around fossil fuels and climate change, and have high educational value in showing how we need to understand the Earth's past to read its future. Next slide, please. The Lyell collections have enormous potential to bring in many students from different disciplines at all levels and to be a fantastic research resource to the University of Edinburgh's world-leading School of Geosciences, the Edinburgh Centre for Carbon Innovation, and to inform the university's overall commitment to sustainable development. And more than that, opening up this and or other earth science collections to research offers us a golden opportunity to engage our communities with the story of Scotland's place in the natural sciences. Earth sciences are relevant to us all, given the impacts of climate change and the changing geographical environment, and understanding the Lyell story has huge potential impact on everyone. And it was based on these principles and with the Lyell collections front and centre that we are aspiring to undertake a transformative programme of collections engagement and access, which sets out to have long-term benefits for the Centre for Research Collections, the University of Edinburgh and our communities. Next slide, please. In order to meet the aims of our engagement and access programme, we have embarked upon an ambitious programme of cataloguing, conservation, digitisation and public engagement activity, which is currently being mapped out over the next 3 years and beyond. And this will include a public exhibition collaborating with other institutions across Edinburgh and beyond to be staged in late 2023. Now, of course, we're only able to take forward our access and engagement aspirations by first ensuring that we have an accurate, comprehensive and accessible catalogue of the collections. And our current work centres around creating detailed item-level catalogue descriptions for Lyell's 294 notebooks on our online archive catalogue archive space. Next slide, please. Lyell's own comprehensive indexes to each of his notebooks form an integral part of the online catalogue. The catalogue of the notebooks began in early 2020, and we aim to complete this phase of cataloguing in July 2021. And thereafter, we will commence cataloguing of the correspondence acquired under the acceptance in lieu scheme, followed by the creation of the enhancement of descriptions relating to the accession received in 1927. And our target is to have completed cataloguing by late 2023. We're indebted to the International Association of Sedimentologists who have agreed to fund the design and development of a new website, Charles Lyell's World Online. And this will allow us over the next 2 years to develop an online resource of digital photographs, of archives, notebooks, alongside transcriptions, indexes, catalogues, interpretation and contextual content, making the Lyell collections accessible to all, from the seasoned researcher to the school child. When considering accessibility and researchability of Lyell's work and ideas, and indeed that of any archive collection, a number of questions arise around how we go about facilitating that. And I'm going to share some of those with you here, and you can keep those in mind today, along with any others I am sure that you yourself have as we continue through the course of the workshops. Next slide, please. The first, which relates to many manuscript collections, is around Lyell's handwriting, and this has presented challenges to even the most experienced members of our team. And a second is around how we make the resource accessible to as wide an audience as possible, including to blind and partially sighted people. And a third is how can we assist researchers in making the connections between the different elements of the collections and to related collections held elsewhere. Next slide, please. And it's at this point that I'm going to hand over to my colleague Elise Ramsey, who's going to tell you more about our pilot digitisation and transcription project. And I hope that I've been able to give you a good sense of the Lyell collections, our goals for the future, and some of the challenges we are considering. And thank you very much for listening, and I really hope you enjoy the rest of the workshop over the course of the next few days. Over to you, Elise.
Hello, thank you for that overview, Elaine. My name is Elise Ramsey, and I wear two hats for this project. I am project archivist on the Lyell project, but also, as many of you know, my name from your inboxes, I am project coordinator for the editor project. And it has been a pleasure to involve Lyell into this exciting foray of transcription. And just now I'll speak a bit about why we selected this collection for transcription and the challenges and aims we experienced when transcribing manually, which led us to choosing this trial for transcribists. As Elaine touched on, many of the aims for this collection require the ambitious goals of full description, full digitization, and full transcription to meet our targets of global access. I know we are not the only ones to feel that the events of the past year have reasserted the importance of digitization and worthwhile access to collections without the need for travel. Therefore, digital access is the way forward. Lockdown in March 2020 required a shift in our priorities on this project, and my colleague Dr. Gillian McKay at the Coburn Geological Museum and I made first efforts of manual transcription on the first notebook to be digitized. This is a bit of what we were up against. As you can see, it was fascinating but highly time-consuming work, which at times felt no more than guesswork. It was a good example of the antiquated scientific language which we needed to brush up on to accurately transcribe his entries. Gillian McKay is a geologist, and even she was uncertain of what he meant by Great Wind Dyke or the trachyte in the Auvergne. And these were things that we had to learn has evolved over the history of science. Some characteristics of the notebooks also include diverse handwriting styles. This one, for example, Lyell was traveling. It gets even worse when he's in the field, and it gets much better when he's sitting at his desk in London. Lexicon was also a challenge, as Lyell references names, places, and subjects that are not widely remembered. For example, here we have Sollenhofen, Knorr, and Walsh, which needed its own research to make sure we were spelling them right. And it's also true that place names often have changed their names since then, as the title has been agreed upon and defined. Transcription, this notebook number 4, took approximately 2 months, part-time work, and 160 hours of our professional time. A third of each of our full-time capacity each week was devoted to working on this. As we can see, that's pretty unsustainable, as we have 294 in the collection, plus a robust collection of papers and correspondence. And though at times tedious, this time with the collection built a necessary foundation of expertise of Lyell's hand and lexicon for myself and for Gillian. With these challenges and aims in mind, the Lyell collection was an easy fit with this project to trial transcribus arose, because it allowed us to still have a hand in the transcription of this collection and still be familiar with the language, but also ultimately, hopefully, allow the repetitive work to be taken over by automation. So what is Transcribus? Transcribus is a platform for text recognition, image analysis, and structure recognition of historical documents. It offers the ability to upload images of digitized collections, to automatically recognize lines of text, and it facilitates an individual or a team to transcribe the words on the page directly into the platform. So as you can see in this picture here, I have uploaded a page from another notebook of Charles Lyell's, and I've run a text analysis on it, and it has picked up each of the lines of Lyell's text. And in the bottom window there, you can see each line. As you click on each of those lines, it highlights the line in question, and you simply put in the words you see, and you move on to the next, and you put in the words which you see. We will demo this in a session this afternoon. Once analysis and transcription is complete for a body of work, it is then possible to use this data to train a model to automatically transcribe new documents in the same hand. Transcribus offers an application which is available to download free of charge, as well as a light web version, both of which we employed in the project. So before working with Transcribus, we formed a few aspirations, our hopes, what Transcribus could possibly offer us. Firstly, we hoped that the program would allow us not only to transcribe more efficiently than using Word documents, as we had in the past, but also by linking up the transcribed text with Lyell's lines on the page, this would afford us new functionality after exporting to be able to use in our own digital viewer to view the digitized notebook pages alongside their transcribed text. Secondly, automatic transcription was of course a factor in selecting the Lyell collection, as creating a handwritten model that could recognize Lyell's hand would not only improve the efficiency of the transcription tasks, but also improve the job of the transcriber by relieving repetitive strain. Jillian and I both experienced eye strain when we were working with the Lyell collection, and more than a bit of frustration as we tried to question what on earth Lyell could be talking about in certain sections. I will be the first to admit, I thought the possibility that a model could accurately learn Lyell's scrawling, difficult handwriting was too good to be true. I witnessed firsthand his habit of changing topics 6 or 7 times in one page, his odd flourishes, and idiosyncratic abbreviations, not to mention his changeable handwriting in pencil and in ink. Surely a machine could never recognize this. And this is what made the Lyell collection the perfect test pilot for trialing Transcribus for potential use with other collections as well. As a challenging collection of vocabulary, handwriting, and layout, we knew that if it could work for this collection, it likely would work for others. So we onboarded 2 interns in February of this year. Our capable and wonderful interns, Evie Salter and Nikki Monroe. Together, we were all trained to use Transcribus by the inimitable Joe Knuckles, who's here, a PhD student at the university studying Transcribus. And together, we thought about how its many functions could suit our needs with the Lyell collection. And it's important to note here that myself, nor Nikki or Evie are experts on 19th century history, geology, or transcription. And yet by employing our collective archival skills, a bit of common sense, a bit of problem solving, and a lot of training on Transcribus, we were able to use this tool to carry out transcription work. And we also were able to work remotely as we are in Edinburgh, Newcastle, and London. So distance was no issue in using Transcribus on a team. When setting up this work, our priorities were to transcribe at least 100 pages of Lyell's notebooks using Transcribus in 8 weeks, which was an ambitious goal to set ourselves. To ease this, we resolved to copying over the draft transcriptions, which my colleague Jillian and I did in March of 2020, which allowed the interns to fill the role of amending and editing the transcriptions while transferring them to the platform. And over the course of 8 weeks, which we will talk about more this afternoon, we were able to transcribe 129 pages of Lyell's notebooks using Transcribus, well exceeding our goal. And we successfully built a model of Lyell's hand. And I promise to tell you more about that this afternoon. But in conclusion, it's been a very positive experience of using Transcribus, and we're excited to tell you more about it this afternoon. And now with this, I will stop sharing my screen And I will ask my colleagues, Jim and Lauren, or Jim and Randy, and Norman and Elaine to turn their cameras on, and we can take a few questions at this time.
So it might be worth just saying if anyone has any questions, if they'd like to put them in the chat box, feel free just to pop them in there. We've stunned everyone into silence,
I think so. So complete.
Or if you do have any questions that come up, either pop them in the chat box or in the discussion box. We're happy to answer any now. And if we're not able to get to any today, then we can certainly collate all of the questions and generate answers for those so that we can produce that after the session. So I'll just pick up on some of the questions that are come up. So I'll ask the questions and then pick up as they're coming into the chat. So the first one is around Transcribus and is it free software? Norman, do you want to take that, or Elise?
I can jump in there actually. Transcribus is free to use in transcribing your material, so you can upload all your images for free. You can create the collections and share them with your team. The cost comes in when you go to create a model of more than 500 pages, and that is I believe it's around 20 euros per. To sort of buy in bulk these credits, which can then be used to create that model. But in just sort of basic transcription, that's not necessary.
That's great. Thanks, Elise. Hopefully that answers your question. So this is from Grace. Was there a specific reason Transcribus was selected over other programs?
I can take this as well. And I think Transcribus, because of our relationship with the READ co-op and our relationship as well with just seeing Transcribus evolve over the years, we were really excited to try it out, and we'd heard such good things that was a reason we went for it. Rachel, do you want to hop on that? I know you had a longer history with it.
I'm just jumping in because I've just had a message off Norman. What we all feared was the technology problem, and that has happened for him just now. So can you repeat the question for me?
So the question, Rachel, was there a specific reason that Transcribus was selected over other programs?
Yeah, so we'd been dabbling, I would say, with Transcribus over the past few years as we've watched it develop. And I've been talking with like Melissa and people to just trial it out. And talking with our development team, and you'll hear from Mike and others later, we felt that it was probably the strongest tool, as well as you know, as Elise has pointed out, free tool. We didn't have a dedicated budget to put to this or to develop a project at this point, so we chose to experiment, I think is the word, with Transcribus. I also had attended the Transcribus workshop in Vienna a couple of years ago and was just astonished at how it had moved on in leaps and bounds, and thought, well, let's just have a go. It was one of those moments of let's just trial and try out something.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm conscious there's some other questions coming through, but I think I'm also aware of the time of the programme, and everybody probably needs a break. So any questions that we didn't get to, we'll take a note of those and get them back in the discussions and make sure that they're available later.
Sure. So Elise is going to put a timer on for us and keep us right in terms of break times in the Slack channel and here. And we will see everyone back in 15 minutes. Thanks very much.